Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Neville and welcome to Selective Imagery. Welcome to Thanks for the Memories, Part 18. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Thanks for the Memories. And today we're going to talk about another Topcon camera. I had talked about the Topcon RE Super a while back, which was a pro-level camera that competed with the Nikon F1. Well, during the same time frame, for the most part, in that 63 to 74, 78 era, there were numerous other Topcon cameras that came out. However, they were not geared for the professional. They were geared for, just your everyday photographer. And the price point was completely different. The camera mount was completely different. And the lenses were completely different. So I'm going to show you here. I'm holding it up here. This is the successor to the Topcon Unirex. This is the Topcon IC-1 Auto 35mm SLR. And like I said, this was the successor to the Topcon Unirex, which, like my bestseller Topcon Auto 100, used a Seikosa leaf shutter in the camera body itself. And due to this leaf shutter no longer being produced, Topcon had to make a change. So this camera came out, and this utilizes a cloth focal plane shutter. And it's called the IC-1 humorously because it had an integrated circuit in it, therefore IC. Okay, it controlled the shutter priority auto exposure system. This was the last Topcon camera to use UV bayonet lens mounts, although they did make some lenses specific for this camera. And if you look at the lens, you can see the designation HI prior to the word top core. So they made a handful of lenses that came out during the time this camera was manufactured, but it still used the UV mount. The UV lens, here's a 35mm UV lens. Okay. And it works on this body. The lenses with the HI designation work on older camera bodies that have the UV mount as well. So for whatever reason, they just decided that when they introduced this camera, that any lenses that they made during the time this camera was out, they just put a different letter designation on them. That's all they did. Now, the camera I have is between 1974 and 76 because it came out with the HI 50mm f2 lens, which is what's on this camera. And then later in 76 to 78, they came out with a 55mm f1.8 lens, and they had to make a few changes to the camera because they now had a lens that was f1.8 because f2 prior to that was the fastest lens they made. So they had to change the markings on this dial, and this dial is called the lens speed compensator dial, and they had to modify it to add the 1.8 designation to it, and I'll get into what this dial does later on. It also had a hot shoe instead of a cold shoe, which this camera has. And then they actually had a battery condition indicator that would turn on when you hit the shutter and look through the viewfinder, the top of the viewfinder, to see what the condition of the battery was. And they changed the word auto on the designation on the camera. Instead of it being the word being in black, it was in red. And then they moved where they put the serial number of the camera. and that's about it. Now, the viewfinder on this camera is 0.8 times magnification, has a micro prism focusing spot, surrounded by a focus ring, fine focus ring, and then full area of ground glass. If you look through the viewfinder, the only information you're going to find in there is on the left-hand side. You're going to see a listing of F numbers and with a indicator needle. And how that works is with this camera, the word auto comes from is you can have this as a shutter priority camera and it will automatically select the correct f-stop to give you the proper exposure depending on what you set the shutter speed on. And in order to be in auto mode, when you are looking at the lens, see the word auto, you have your shutter speed dial, and your f-stop dial are built into the lens mount. So your lenses do not have aperture rings on them. That's how they save money. I mentioned that before. So your shutter speed and your aperture, your f-stops, are here, and if you put it in auto mode, it locks in that position, and you have to push a little detent on the lens to be able to move. So you can see it right here. See that little detent right there? You got to push that in to be able to then get it out of that auto setting and change the f-stops to whatever you want. So then you're in manual mode. You also have like warning indicators at each end of the f-stop scale in the viewfinder. And if your needle is into the red, either at the top or the bottom, then you're not going to get a proper exposure and you need to change some settings. Or you may be out of range and not be able to take that shot. Now, you have 10 shutter speed settings, and if you look at the shutter speed dial, there's actually the numerical values are in different colors. So you have bulb 1 second, 1/2 second, and 1/4 second that they're actually in green. Those particular shutter speeds can only be used if you're in manual mode. The rest of the shutter speeds are in black that you can use in auto mode. And the only one that's not black is 1/60th of a second, which is colored red so that you know that that's your flash sync. And if you wanted to use a flash that used bulbs, you would have to use a shutter speed of 1/15th of a second or slower. I think the guidance on what you would set that is defined by the type of bulb that you're using, and usually there's something printed on the box that'll tell you what shutter speed to set on your camera. The metering is TTL center weighted, full aperture metering, has 2 CDS cells on each side of the finder eyepiece, and it measures reflected light off of the whole finder area. And like I said, the auto exposure mode is available for shutter speeds from 1/8 of a second to 1/500th of a second. Film speed is 25, ASA 25 to 300. You change your ASA, if you look, it's also part of the lens mount. You can see the ASA numbers there, and you see this little button. You push this button and you move that, push it and move the ring, move the dot on that ring so it lines up with the ASA value that you need for your film. Really easy to use. Okay, this camera uses now obsolete PX625 batteries, 2 of them. Now, luckily, you can get wine cell batteries that will work. Their MRB 625s are like $9 a piece. The camera doesn't have an on-off switch, so I recommend that if you're not going to use the camera, even for a day, you use it, take the batteries out, put some tape over the holes that are on the top of the plus side of the battery, store them in, room temperature conditions, and just put them back in when you want to use the camera again. So when you look at the front of this camera, you have a PC sync over here for the flash, and on the right hand side you have what they call the lens speed compensator dial, which I talked about earlier. And what they had to do what this does is it has an indentation on this outer ring, and you line it up with what your widest lens opening is. So if your lens is a 200 millimeter f4, you take this outer ring and it clicks, and you click it so it lines up with the number 4. And what that does is it calibrates the lens to your metering system. Your camera does not have a mechanical means or an electronic means of knowing what the widest opening is on your camera. So you have to tell it. Now in the old Nikon Fs, you had to tell it via mechanically. You had to like set the f-stop on the lens to 5.6. You had to take the rabbit ears, slide it over a mechanical feature on the body and the pentaprism, and you had to lock it in place, and then you had to rotate the aperture ring all the way one way, all the way the other way, and then that basically calibrated the lens to your camera. So this is a bit easier. You just have to look at the lens and say, oh, this is an f2 lens. Oh, I'll set this over onto the f2 marking. Now, when I said the later version of this, you had a f1.8 lens, so they had to modify this dial and they had to add a 1.8 to it. Okay, so that's what that's for. Now, I already talked about the shutter speed ring and the f-stop ring being on the lens mount itself. If you want to take the lens off, there's a tang here. You just push that in, twist the lens, comes right off. Okay. Then this is your red dot here, what you align to then put the lens back on the camera. And I will do that here. And you want to move it after you twist it to make sure that it locks, okay? Because otherwise the metering system will not work when you put it in auto if that isn't locked and clicked in all the way. So that's all you have for the front, okay? The bottom of the camera, pretty simple. You got your button that you have to push when you're at the end of your roll, and you got to rewind the film. You push the button in, and you rewind the film. And then you have your tripod, your threaded hole for your tripod mount. Then if you look at the top, I'm looking at it from the back, you got your film winder. You lift that up and pull to pop the back of the camera, which I'll do. There's the insides. Then you have your film counter, and you have your shutter release, and you have your film advance lever, and your cold shoe. Okay, that's all you have for the top. And then on the back, you basically have a battery cover. Put a coin in there. You only got to turn it a quarter turn and it pops out, and then you have your viewfinder. Now this camera, just like my RE Super, I'm going to have to change the mirror foam and the seals for the film compartment. So I'll do that on a rainy Sunday when I have nothing better to do, and then I'll get that up and going. And like I said, I have a decent view through the viewfinder. A few specks of mirror foam, And I'll probably be able to remove, maybe some of them, but not all of them. But it's going to be not an inconvenience in terms of being able to focus or get composition or see what I'm looking at, type of thing, and the meter works fine. So I'll be very happy. I did have to repair some of the covering on the camera. Was bulged out a little bit. That was a simple fix. I mean, that took me like 15 minutes. And it was repaired, not a big deal. So I just want to say something about here on the batteries, is that they sell 675 designated hearing aid batteries, extremely cheap, very, very cheap compared to the wine cells, and they will fit in the camera. But the problem is they're not designed for a camera. And wine cells, when you look at how their energy is depleted, it's pretty much the curve is straight, and then it dives down and the battery's dead. So you go from everything, the meter's going to be accurate, the power's there, and then you got nothing. With other batteries, and I'm assuming for a hearing aid battery, you're going to start off here and it's going to tail off pretty quick, but it isn't going to just go from good exposure to a dead battery. You're gonna have some error in your exposure, and it's just not worth the grief. You'll save money on batteries, but it's going to take you a while to understand, like, oh, if I use these batteries, maybe I'm always a half a stop underexposed, or what have you. And you gotta, you learn. It's expensive to learn that with the cost of film and developing. Okay, not something I want to do, so I'll pay extra for the proper batteries. And I did get a flash with one of the other Topcon, a Braun flash, very simple flash. It's not a hot shoe flash, just has a little nub that sticks out that puts a little pressure on the top plate here, and I can plug in the PC sync cord on the front. Okay, like the old days. I'll turn the flash on. Set the shutter speed for 1/60th of a second. And once this thing powers up, there we go. Somehow it still works after all these years. I'm shocked. And of course, your other option is to put a camera bracket off of your bottom of your camera body so that your flash is away from the being right in line, which is better idea to do that. Now, like I said, I ended up getting this because I had a bunch of UV lenses, but some of the UV lens bodies, they were not, most of them had the leaf shutter in the body. And when this camera came out, and then the one a few years later that used a little faster lens on it, had the few changes I talked about, those were the only two camera bodies that had a focal plane shutter. All the other ones with the UV mount had leaf shutters. And if you're going to go out and buy one of these, you just want a collectible camera. These don't cost an arm and a leg. An RE Super is going to set you back quite a bit, depending on what lens is on it. But something like this would be a great, starter camera for somebody, and providing that you're willing to spend the money to get it cleaned up really good inside and get the foam replaced. But the other cameras that came out prior to this, you had a Topcon Wink Mirror S that came out from 63 to 64. You had the Topcon Uni, which is what they called it in Japan. They called it the Besseler Topcon Auto 100, which I have in the cabinet. That came out 64 to 69. You had a Topcon Unirex, in Japan called the Besseler Topcon Unirex from 69 to 73. You had a Topcon Unirex EE from 72 to 74. And then you had the two versions of this Topcon IC-1 Auto, which was from 73 to 78, but they always, I don't think they really had much out in 73. I think maybe it was released in 73, but probably didn't ship till 74. And all these UV lenses, like I said, UV only means ultraviolet coating, lens coating. And one characteristic all the UV lenses have, and it really isn't something that's on the lens, but your setting on your f-stop choices here, you can stop it down to f22. So any lens basically can get stopped down to f22. It's not like, one lens is f16 and one lens is f32 and one lens is f22, because your f-stops are defined on the body itself, not inside the lens. You basically have, f2 to f22. So I'm sure when they came out with that 1.8 lens, they had to change that dial as well. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As I say, enjoy life, capture some of it, no matter what camera you use, whatever you have in your hand. And have a good time. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider it. And leave me a comment. Until next time, take care. Have a good one. And thank you for watching the video. And if you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment. And if you haven't subscribed, I would appreciate it if you would. At least consider it anyway. So until next time, have a good day.